The ICU looked like something out of a nightmare. Half the room was underwater, murky brown water swirling around overturned chairs and floating medical supplies. Outside, Hurricane Delilah screamed like a living thing, hurling debris against the reinforced windows with sounds like gunshots. In the middle of it all, Emily Grant, her scrubs soaked through, water up to her waist. Her arms moved in a steady rhythm, squeeze, release, working the oxygen bag that was keeping 7-year-old Chloe Rowan alive. The ventilator sat silent and dark beside them, its battery finally dead after hours of fighting the storm. Emily's shoulders burned, her hands cramped. She'd lost track of how many times she'd squeezed that bag, but she knew one thing for certain. If she stopped, the little girl in her arms would die. 14 hours since the storm made landfall, and this child's breath now lived in her hands. Water lapped higher around the chair she dragged over to stay above the flood. The hospital creaked and groaned around them like a ship in a storm. Through the broken windows, she could hear the hurricane's fury, trees snapping, metal scraping against concrete, the distant crash of something massive being torn apart. Chloe's face was pale but peaceful, with a trusting expression. Her tiny chest rose and fell with each bump of the bag. Emily had promised her parents she'd keep their daughter safe when they were evacuated hours ago. She'd promised Chloe she wouldn't be alone. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Emily's arm shook with exhaustion, but her hands never paused in their life-giving rhythm. By dawn, the storm would pass, but would either of them still be alive? How do you keep a promise when even the storm wants you to break it? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe. 12 hours earlier, Emily Grant's morning had been as ordinary as they come. She reheated the same cup of coffee 3 times before finally giving up and drinking it lukewarm. Her sneakers sat neatly by the front door, muscle memory from 20 years of nursing shifts, and her one-bedroom apartment was quiet except for the hum of her phone. A text from her 17-year-old son, George, blinked on the screen. "Don't stay too late tonight, Mom. Storm's looking nasty." Emily smiled. At 38, she was used to worrying about her patients. Now, her teenage son was learning to worry about her. By the time she arrived at St. Mary's Children's Hospital, the chatter about Hurricane Delilah had already begun. Maintenance crews were tying down equipment. Administrators buzzed about evacuation protocols. During the morning huddle, Victoria from the day shift had joked, "Emily, you'd stay through a hurricane if someone needed Tylenol." The unit laughed. Emily only shrugged. Someone had to be the last line of defense for the kids who couldn't fight for themselves. She moved through her morning with quiet purpose, adjusting IV drips, checking monitors, leaning down to whisper comfort into frightened ears. The kind of work that never made headlines but kept fragile lives afloat. By noon, the world outside had changed. The sky had gone a bruised green-gray, winds tearing palm fronds from their branches. Emily found her eyes drifting towards the window more often, feeling the storm edging closer with every gust. When she turned back, her gaze fell on Chloe Rowan, 7 years old, her small frame tethered into a ventilator, her chest rising and falling in time with the machine. Emily reached down and smoothed a damp strand of hair from the girl's forehead. Chloe's parents had been evacuated hours ago. They'd left her with one promise from Emily: "We'll keep her safe." That was when the PA system cracked overhead, static buzzing before the announcement. "Attention all staff and patients. Hurricane Delilah has been upgraded. Emergency evacuation procedures are now in effect. Non-essential personnel to designated zones. Essential staff, prepare patients for transfer immediately." Emily's hand lingered on Chloe's hair as the words sank in. Outside, the hurricane was rising. Inside, the ventilator hummed. The storm was coming, whether they were ready or not. Hurricane Delilah hit like the world was coming to an end. The first sign came at 2 p.m. when the ICU lights flickered. Emily Grant stood at the window, watching as the ambulance and helicopters formed a desperate convoy away from the coast. The wind howled like a living thing, driving rain sideways, hammering the glass until it shook in its frame. By 4 p.m., the hospital lost main power. The backup generators roared to life, but even they sounded strained, like the whole building was groaning under the storm's weight. Most of the children had already been transferred inland. Emily had helped load fragile patients into specialized transports, parents clutching at stretchers as if their touch alone could keep their children alive. But Chloe Rowan remained. Her ventilator was too large, too fragile, too vital. When the last helicopter landed, the flight medic stopped into the ICU, rain dripping from his helmet. He looked at Chloe, then at the ventilator, and shook his head. "We're maxed out. Every inch is filled with patients and equipment. The rig can take both her and that machine. We'll have to come back once the storm clears." Emily's heart sank. She won't survive that long. The medic held her gaze. Regret etched across his face. "We'll try again when it's safe, I swear." Dr. Parker touched her arm. His voice was low, grim. "Emily, the portable oxygen tanks buy us 6 hours at most. The ventilator's backup battery, maybe 12. The storm's forecast to last 14. No calculation could save her." At 6 p.m., water was already rising through the building's lower floors. Emily could hear it in the pipes, in the distant crashes as the equipment floated free. By 7 p.m., the generators drowned. The lights died. Red emergency bulbs glowed dim and weak, casting the ICU in bloody shadows. The ventilator beeped as it switched to battery. A countdown. Emily could almost hear ticking inside her skull. "The evacuation team is prepared to leave." Nurse Williams caught her hand. Last birds in 10 minutes. You can still make it." Emily's eyes stayed on Chloe, tiny chest rising and falling in mechanical rhythm. "She can't make it, not without someone here." "Then hold this," Williams said, pressing a radio into her palm. "Channel 7 for fire rescue, 12 for Coast Guard." She swallowed hard. "We'll send them straight to you when it's safe." The team filed out. Some hugged her, some just nodded, unable to look her in the eye. None of them wanted to leave a child, but the storm had dictated the rules. By 8 p.m., the last helicopter's light vanished into the storm. Emily stood at the window until they were swallowed by rain. Then she turned back to the only patient left. The hours dragged like centuries. At 9 p.m., the water was ankle-deep in the hallways. Medical charts flowed past like ghosts of patients who'd already left. A supply cart slammed against the wall, metal groaning in the current. The smell of diesel mixed with bleach and mold, a chemical cocktail that stung her throat. By 10 p.m., the water reached her knees. Emily dragged Chloe's bed to the highest corner of the room, her soaked scrubs clinging to her skin. The room had become an island, surrounded by swirling debris. She balanced ivy poles on chairs to keep them above the flood. Somewhere down the hall, glass shattered, followed by the crash of equipment swallowed by the water. Emily's mind flicked to George. Her son was safe inland with his father, probably glued to the news. She pictured him checking his phone, waiting for her call. She had promised him she wouldn't stay too late tonight. Now, all she could hope was that if she didn't make it, someone would tell him why. At 11 p.m., the ventilator's low battery chimped, each beep slicing through her like a knife. The storm outside ragged with renewed fury, as if answering the machine's cry with its own roar. Emily forced herself to keep moving, checking Chloe's collar, repositioning her small body, whispering words girl couldn't hear but that Emily needed to say. "You're not alone, sweetheart. I'm right here." At 11:30, a crash like thunder shook the hospital. Emily staggered, clutching Chloe's bed frame. Part of the roof had given way somewhere nearby. Water surged higher, waist deep now, icy enough to numb her legs. She dragged a chair close and climbed onto it, leaning over the bed. Carefully, she gathered Chloe into her arms as much as the ventilator tubing allowed. The child felt feather-light, so small against the vast violence surrounding them. At midnight, the ventilator died. The silence was devastating. No rhythmic whoosh, no mechanical assurance, just the storm screaming outside, the water creeping higher inside, and the sound of Chloe struggling to breathe. Emily's hands shook as she grabbed the bag valve mask. She fitted it over Chloe's face and squeezed once. The child's chest rose, released, it fell, again, again. Her shoulders burned, her arms screamed with fatigue. She had already been awake for 20 hours, already fought for a dozen patients through the evacuation. But none of that mattered now. The whole world had narrowed to this rhythm. Squeeze, release, breathe, squeeze, release, breathe. Outside, something massive, maybe a tree, maybe a building, slammed against the hospital wall. The window in Chloe's room spider-webbed, groaning like it would give way. Emily pressed her forehead to Chloe's and whispered into the storm, "I've got you. You won't be alone, not while I'm breathing." The water climbed higher, licking at the chair's legs. The storm howled in answer, daring her to stop. And Emily kept squeezing, because stopping wasn't an option. Time began to dissolve. There was only the bag in her hands, the rise and fall of Chloe's chest, and the steady count in Emily's head. 100 breaths, 200, 500. Her arms burned, muscle cramping from the relentless repetition. Sweat mixed with the flood water on her skin, dripping down her face and stinging her eyes. She shifted her grip, adjusted her posture, and found new angles to buy a little more strength. "Just breathe with me, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "One more breath, just one more." 1,000 breaths, 1,500, 2,000. Then Chloe's chest didn't rise. Emily froze, staring at the dim light. She squeezed again. Nothing. Panic surged like ice through her veins. No, no, no. She repositioned the mask, tilted the child's head back the way she'd been taught. Another squeeze. Still nothing. "Stay with me, Chloe. Don't do this." She delivered a rescue breath, willing air into the girl's lungs. Seconds stretched into eternity until finally a weak rise, the smallest exhale against Emily's hand. Relief nearly broke her in half. She kept going, forcing her own fear into the rhythm of the bag. 3,000 breaths, 4,000. Lightning flashed through the broken windows, illuminating the room like a photograph. For one instant, Emily saw herself reflected in the glass. Soaked scrubs, hollow eyes, arms locked around a child who was still alive because she refused to quit. That image burned into her memory, the proof that she was the machine now, and she would not fail. The water climbed higher, reaching the seat of the chair. Emily curled her legs tighter, cocooning Chloe against her chest. The mask pressed firm against the little girl's face. 5,000 breaths, 6,000. The storm howled like a predator testing the walls of its cage, but Emily's hands moved with unbreakable rhythm. Each squeeze was defiance, each release a vow. Outside, Hurricane Delilah tore the city apart. Inside that flooded ICU, Emily Grant had become a lifeline, made of sheer willpower, a mother to a child who wasn't hers, a machine of flesh and blood. giving breath after breath after breath. And she would not stop, not until the storm did. Dawn came like a whisper after the hurricane screams. Emily didn't notice at first. She was trapped in a strange twilight world where nothing existed except the rhythm of her hands and the sound of Chloe's breathing. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. Her voice had gone hoarse hours ago, but she still whispered her mantra. One more breath, just one more. The flood water had stopped rising sometime during the night, stabilizing just below the level of the chair seat. Emily's legs were numb from the awkward position, her back locked in a painful curve around the child in her lap. Her arms moved automatically now, beyond exhaustion, beyond pain, running on something deeper than muscle memory. She'd lost count of the breaths somewhere around 8,000. Or was it 10,000? Time had become meaningless in the endless dark. The first hint of morning was a gradual lessening of the storm's fury. The wind still howled, but without the apocalyptic rage of the night before. Rain still hammered the broken windows, but the building had stopped its tortured groaning. Emily blinked in the dim gray light filtering through the cracked glass. Her eyes felt gritty, unfocused. Everything hurt. Her shoulders, her back, her hands, her neck. But Chloe's chest still rose and fell with each squeeze of the bag, still alive, still breathing. It was the sound of voices that finally pulled Emily fully back to awareness. Hello? Anyone in there? The shout came from somewhere down the hallway, followed by the splash of boots through flood water. Emily tried to call back, but her voice was nothing more than a croak. She squeezed the bag again, couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, and tried to make noise. Here, she whispered, then louder. Here, in here. The splashing grew closer. Multiple voices now, urgent and professional. Coast Guard search and rescue. Call out if you can hear us. Room 314, Emily managed, her voice like sandpaper. Room 314. The door burst open with a crash of equipment and shouts. Powerful flashlight beams swept the flooded room, and Emily heard someone suck in a sharp breath. Jesus Christ, Tony, get over here. You seeing this? 3 Coast Guard rescuers in bright orange gear waded into the room, their lights converging on the impossible scene. Emily still upright on the chair, soaked to the skin, her uniform torn and stained, eyes glazed with exhaustion, arms locked in mechanical rhythm around a small oxygen bag. She looked like a statue carved from desperation and love. Ma'am, the lead rescuer approached carefully, speaking in the gentle tone reserved for trauma victims. Ma'am, we're here to help. Can you hear me? Emily's eyes tracked to him slowly, as if she was seeing through fog. Her lips moved. Just one more breath. Just one more. Her hands never stopped working the bag. Get the pediatric oxygen tank from the boat. The leader called over his shoulder, and radio for immediate medical evac. A second rescuer was already checking Chloe's pulse, shining a penlight into her eyes. Kid's alive. Vitals are weak but stable. How long has she been doing this? Emily tried to answer, but all that came out was a whisper. Promised she wouldn't be alone. The third rescuer returned with a portable oxygen tank and mask. Ready to switch her over? On 3, the leader said, positioning himself to take over Emily's movements. 1, 2, 3. They gently replaced the bag valve mask with the tank's breathing apparatus. The steady hiss of oxygen filled the room, and a monitor began beeping with Chloe's heartbeat, weak but regular, alive but fighting. Only then did Emily's chest begin to loosen, her first real breath in hours shuddering out of her. But her arms, locked in place for so long, trembled violently as the rescuers carefully pried the empty bag from her grip. It's okay, ma'am. You can let go now. We've got her. But Emily couldn't let go. Her hands were still frozen around the shape of the bag. her fingers cramped into claws. The rescuers had to massage feeling back into her arms before they could gently lower her from the chair. She kept this kid alive, one rescuer whispered. All night, she was the machine. They wrapped Emily in a thermal blanket and guided her towards the door. But she fought to look back at Chloe. Is she? Will she? She's going to make it, the lead rescuer assured her. Thanks to you, she's going to make it. As they helped Emily through the flooded corridor, she caught glimpse of the devastation. The hospital looked like a war zone. Ceiling tiles hung in tatters, windows were blown out, and equipment floated in brown water like the debris in shipwreck. But they had both survived. Outside, Emily blinked in the pale morning light. The hurricane had moved on, leaving behind a landscape that looked like another planet. Trees were stripped bare or uprooted entirely. Cars sat flipped on their roofs. The hospital's parking lot was a lake dotted with debris. A medical helicopter sat on the only clear patch of ground, rotors already spinning. What's your name, ma'am? One of the paramedics asked as they loaded both Emily and Chloe onto stretchers. Emily, she whispered. Emily Grant. Well, Emily Grant, you just did something extraordinary. As they lifted off, Emily saw the hospital shrinking below them, that broken building where she had spent the longest night of her life. In a few hours, it would be crawling with insurance adjusters and structural engineers, everyone trying to assess the damage. But Emily knew the real assessment. One little girl was still breathing. That was all that mattered. Her hands still curled in the memory of the oxygen bag. Even as the sedative pulled her under, her fingers stayed clenched in that life-giving shape, as if her body refused to forget. 14 hours, thousands of breaths, one promise kept. The helicopter banked towards the mainland hospital, carrying its precious cargo towards safety and healing, while behind them, the sun rose fully for the first time since the storm began. The story broke before Emily even knew it. In the press briefing, the Coast Guard mentioned the nurse who had stayed behind with the ventilator-dependent child until the last possible flight. Reporters seized on the detail, and soon headlines appeared. The nurse who refused to leave. But Emily barely noticed. She spent 3 days in the hospital herself, hooked up to IV fluids, her body recovering from dehydration and exhaustion. The doctors told her she had pushed past what should have been physically possible, kept going on sheer willpower. George visited every day, clutching cheap hospital coffee like it was treasure. He looked at her with wide-awed eyes. Mom, you're famous. Everyone's calling you a hero. Emily shook her head, her voice quiet but firm. I'm not the hero, sweetheart. I'm just a nurse who kept a promise. 2 doors down, the real miracle was unfolding. 7-year-old Chloe Rowan had stabilized in the mainland hospital's ICU. Her infection finally broke. Her parents never left her side. On Emily's last day in recovery, the Rowan family visited her room. Chloe's mother held out a folded piece of paper, its edges soft from being handled too often. She smoothed it open on Emily's blanket. A crayon drawing of a stick figure nurse with angel wings, standing beside a small girl under a crooked sun. She wanted you to have this, her mother said, her eyes shining with tears. Her way of saying thank you. Chloe climbed closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You're my breathing angel. Emily held it together until they left. Then the drawing slipped from her lap, and her eyes filled. The tears came quietly, not from fear or exhaustion now, but from a deep, fragile gratitude that she and Chloe had both made it through. Months passed when St. Mary's Children's Hospital reopened. It wasn't the same place. New storm-resistant backup generators hummed in the basement. Stockpiles of portable oxygen lined in the supply rooms. Across the region, Pediatric ICUs adopted the same measures. Doctors and nurses called it the Emily Grant Protocol. Emily returned quietly, turning down talk shows, book deals, and morning news appearances. What she wanted most was to step back into the ward and do her job. On her first day, the staff surprised her with a plaque that would hang in the pediatric ICU in recognition of the extraordinary dedication to patient care. Emily Grant, RN, the nurse who refused to leave. Emily smiled politely, but under her breath she whispered, "It should really say, the nurse who made a promise." A year later, Chloe bounded back to St. Mary's Children's Hospital for a checkup, healthy and strong. When it was over, she tucked her mother down the hall to the ICU. The moment she spotted Emily, she ran straight to her, hugging her legs. "Miss Emily, Mama says I'm going to be a nurse when I grow up, just like you." Emily knelt, her voice soft but sure. "The world will need you, sweetheart." As Chloe skipped away, Emily turned back to her rounds, adjusting IV lines, calming frightened parents, listening to the steady beeps of machines. Just another day in the life of a nurse who once kept a child alive with nothing but her own two hands. Because that's the truth about heroism. It isn't always grand or loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and unyielding. Sometimes it is a promise whispered in the dark and kept until dawn. Everyday heroes are all around us.